Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another session of Youth Perspectives. Today we're going to talk about a really relevant topic with the youth, and the topic is peer pressure because it is something that affects people of all ages, not just the youth and not just people in this country either. So today we have a very special guest with us, Gazina.
Assalamu alaikum.
And this is her first time on the show, so we're really happy to have her here. And we'll start off by just talking about what peer pressure is. So Gazina, do you have anything to say about what peer pressure is to you?
I think it's a fairly common and also just very self-explanatory, as in it's just that phenomenon where people around you, the environment around you affects you and your decisions.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing I noticed about what peer pressure is that it's not limited to a single thing. It could be something like, it could be with anything like books, movies, TV shows, even languages, because as we see when people use certain slangs or use certain words, we get kind of pressured into using those words as well. So those are some other examples. Do you have any other examples of what could be considered?
I think it can also be something like your role models, the people that you look up to, teachers or anything, right? So it's just a matter of making sure that the people you look up to or the people that you hold in a venerable light are sort of people that have a good character, or they hold up to their responsibilities.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gazina, because a lot of the time, and today we see that more than ever with the entertainment industry, we see certain celebrities or certain famous people that a lot of others look up to, and then sometimes we kind of get pressured into doing the same thing as well. But unfortunately, from the Islamic perspective, these people are not some people who should be our role models, but we're kind of pressured into that position. So that's another good example. So we covered books, TV shows, language, role models, even the way we dress. I feel like a lot of times, which we'll cover later as well, because that in itself is an extensive topic. How sometimes we're supposed to dress in a certain way, but then seeing other people and seeing all this the fashion industry, seeing other Muslims as well dress in certain ways, we kind of feel pressure to conform to that norm of how it is socially acceptable to dress. And even though that may go against what Islam tells us to, we kind of feel like we have to do it for the sake of blending in. So next on, we'll talk about why we think peer pressure is such a relevant issue today, because it always exists, but why do you think today it's a bigger issue than before?
I think because with the influx of just social media and everyone's being connected across the globe, there's so many different norms and cultures and practices that are around everywhere. And you'll be, for example, scrolling through Instagram or any social media app, and you just see so many different ideas of what perfection is, or what is acceptable or looked up to in society, and you have to decide in the back of your mind while you're just double tapping that post, that is this something that I find respectable, is this something I want to be. You don't even realize it, when you decide, oh, I like this, or wow, or you comment on a post, you're sort of contributing to that norm, or that post becoming popular and affecting other people as well.
Yeah, definitely, Gazina. I was going to mention that as well. A reason why I think peer pressure today is a huge issue is because now more than ever, with the rise of technology and social media, it is so easy to keep tabs on other people's lives. Yeah. So we kind of see, and we mentioned this last week, social media and the many detrimental effects of social media, but it's really important to consider that no one posts their failures. Everyone's posting this twisted, filtered version of their lives, which may not be an accurate representation of what their life really is like, but we're fooled into thinking that that's how they live, that they have this perfect life. And we think people dress a certain way, they have everyone posts these really cliche photos, and we know every social media account has these photos, pictures of food, pictures of friends, pictures of traveling's a big one, or just if they're wearing a really great outfit, they have to get the right angle, get the right lighting, and then we see that all the time. And after constant exposure, we become fooled into believing, we become brainwashed into believing that this is just how everyone is, this is how life is, and if we want to keep up with the times, we have to conform to these things as well. So it's really sad because young children who have access to social media, unfortunately, are victims to this kind of this way of thinking, and they're too young to understand that individuality is really celebrated and really important, and they obviously feel like they have to conform to these societal pressures and to kind of start acting like how everyone else is, even though that may be against what they believe and it may be against their own religion. So I feel like social media is a really big issue because everyone, regardless of their age, regardless of what country they're from, they fall victim to this, negative downward spiral of always comparing, yourself to other people. And this can become a huge issue if no one is there to tell you that, hey, it's okay to be yourself and you don't have to really conform to all these other things. So anything else you want to add about that, Gazina?
About social media, not really.
It's pretty self-explanatory. Like everyone knows. So next we're going to talk about the ages affected by peer pressure, because I know for a fact a lot of youth are really victim to peer pressure. But Gazina, do you think there are any other ages? Do you think peer pressure affects people of all ages, or is it just a specific age?
I think that honestly, sure, it does affect, people of all ages, but not to the extent that it would the youth, because we are at this age very prone to influence and, just our like consumer culture and like the people around us, what they think, because we're still forming our opinions on everything.
Yeah, definitely, Gazina. That's a really great point. And I feel like it's kind of like a parabola, right? Like as, when you're young, you really don't care about what people think about you. You're 5 years old, you're 10 years old, you don't care. And you're just like, doing your own thing. You have your own interests, your own passions, your own hobbies. But then when you start reaching, I think, around middle school, and this is like with psychology as well, you stop caring about what your parents think and what your family thinks, and you start caring about what your peers think of you. You want the approval of your peers. And that's when all this, parent-child conflict happens during, adolescence. And that's when, when you become a teenager, that's when you feel like, okay, I really want to conform because I want my friends to accept me for who I am. And sometimes we have to change who we are. That's our thought. We have to change who we are for them to accept us. So this is when people are most vulnerable to peer pressure, around their teen years, when they're entering their teen years, all the way through their mid-20s even, because as children go through high school, they go through college. In college, they celebrate their individuality a little more. However, it's still there because, you're still together in the same campus, you're part of the same organizations, and as a college student, I can, attest to that it does still exist, the peer pressure to do things. And what makes it worse is that sometimes when you don't do something that is something that people generally do, you might, receive negative attention, or you might receive hate for that. For example, I remember, this is a personal example, but when I was in middle school and all, my friends, they listened to music and I didn't. And I would be made fun of for that a lot. So it was really, really hard to just stay true to my Islamic values when everyone around me was not only doing something I wasn't allowed to do, but was making fun of me for not doing it. So Gazina, do you have any examples?
Well, mine isn't really music, but for me it was more clothing, right? So as you mentioned earlier, it was just hard because the people around me that were, complimented every day for, oh my God, your outfit looks so good. It would always be clothes that were really short or tight, or they were just, they're showing a lot of skin. And for me, it was hard to stand there just on the corner, wearing long clothes that my parents were like, that's acceptable, and not receive any attention for it. Because that's what you want. As a kid, you want attention. And unfortunately, we all go to extreme lengths to get that attention. So it's just a matter of realizing that your outfits or your clothes or your habits will forever be given attention. People are going to hate on it or love it, but it depends on who you hang out with. Because if you wear modest clothes or you don't listen to music, if you hang out with the proper friend group, then they'll, applaud you for it, not hate on you.
Yeah, that's a great point because, friends, I never really thought of that. Your friend group also affects kind of how you feel, how your comfort with your own self and how independent you are, how confident you are. Your friends have a huge impact on your confidence. So it is important to choose a good friend group. That's actually a good idea for a future topic. But definitely during this age, peer pressure is such a big issue. And then I feel like as we grow older, out of college, we enter the workforce, we have our own lives, even if you don't work, just, being an adult. I feel like the youth as a youth, I always thought that adults just really didn't care about peer pressure. Yeah. They were just their own people. But unfortunately, I don't know if it's with all adults, but I know in culture, there's this very famous phrase we've all heard, what will people say? Oh. So I feel like to some extent, there is still that thing there that people like that adults still think, oh my god, my honor and my reputation depends on so much, so I have to really go out of my way to make sure that I'm someone who people respect. And Islamically, keeping up your honor is so important, right? But to the extent that some people go to the point where it's not even like Islam anymore.
Yeah,
they just go like
culture.
extra mile, like the way people dress, the way people talk. How many people do you have to invite for that party? Like, oh, I have to have a party this certain way, or this dinner this certain way, because the other person had it that way too. So if I have any way that's not as good as theirs, people are going to talk about me. So it's really people live their lives based on what will other people say about me. And this is really dangerous, because if you kind of depend your happiness on what other people think of you, if your happiness depends on other people's opinions, then you're always going to find some reason why you're not good enough. You're always going to find some reason where you're lacking, or where someone else is better than you, and then you're going to fall into this like cycle of comparison and comparing yourself to other people. And we all know that it's not going to end well, and comparing yourself is never going to get you anywhere good, and it's just this negative cycle. It's really hard to get out of. So I feel like never think that you're safe from peer pressure just because you're older. And in fact, if you're older, you should be more on the lookout, because I feel like the elderly think that they are not really victims to that. So they're like, oh, they lay their guard down. So, but keep your guard up, because you never know that where the peer pressure will come from. It could be from the smallest things, and you might not even realize it, because of a majority of the time, peer pressure is something that you don't actively know is happening, right? It's like just subconsciously, it's something that's working behind the scenes, and you don't know until it's too late, and you realize, oh my god, what am I doing? This is not who I am. So that's something that's really important to know, that peer pressure is something that can affect all ages. And now, as we see this trend with the rise of social media, the rise of technology, we see that the age that people fall victim to peer pressure is even younger and younger now, because for like my younger siblings or younger people, like in the younger grades, they're actually doing things that teenagers do. They dress a certain way, they wear like loads of makeup, and these are like middle school girls, and they're just like speaking a certain way, like the slang, the language they use. And it's something that's really surprising, because when like my friends, we were that age, it was really different. We just really didn't care about what people thought. But now, like with social media, everyone's like, oh my god, I have to look that way. And it's really sad, because what the entertainment industry, what social media, what the fashion industry, what our society upholds is something that's so against Islam. And the younger you are, the harder it is to differentiate between right and wrong. So you have to be very careful about that. Next up, we would like to discuss the Islamic perspective, because we repeatedly mentioned, peer pressure is something else, and sometimes the things that we're pressured into doing go against Islamic values. So Gazina, from the Islamic perspective, what do you think Islam says about peer pressure and caring about what other people think of you?
I think apart from, the focus on what peer pressure and like its impacts on us are, I think that Islam, and specifically like Imam Ali and the Prophet, identify that the source, they address the roots of the problem, right? The friends who you keep around you, your friend group. So there's quite a few hadiths, and like sayings on how, a successful Muslim, or a successful Muslim, someone who has a good friend group, and how like, who they even identify who your friends should be, what are their qualities, what good ones do versus bad ones. Because honestly speaking, if you do have a good friend group, they can help you and tell you when you are falling prey to peer pressure, right? Because oftentimes, if I'm thinking that, something I'm doing is causing me to, be inferior, or, hey, I should look like that. If my friends are good and they really care about me, right? Not just care about me, but they also uphold Islamic values, they'll point it out. They'll tell me that, hey, that's not something you should be looking up to. That's not something that's respectable. Maybe you should look this way instead. So I think it's really astonishing and like kind of nice that so many years ago, before all of this even became well known, that hey, like these issues exist, this is how it happens, our prophets and our imams already told us that this is the main problem, is who you choose to keep as company, and that's why you fall prey to peer pressure.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Like time and time again, we're reminded, even through
yeah.
hadith and through the examples of the lives of the prophets and the imams, that our friend circle is so, so important because they have this profound impact on us that we may not understand or realize until we're just, it's too late. So another Islamic perspective I'd like to bring up is also from the lives of the prophets and the imams. And one imam specifically that I really, really love to talk about this is Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Because, when he made the treaty with Muawiyah, a lot of people were kind of against him. They said, why are you doing this? And he received so much negative attention for that, but he had to do what he had to do because he knew what was right. And although that meant that he lost a lot of followers, he still knew that he had to stay true to the path of Allah. And in fact, many scholars say that Imam Hassan was one of the loneliest imams because he had to make these tough decisions that, did not conform to the popular opinion of these other people. So Imam Hassan taught us that you don't have to be popular to be right. Just because someone is really well known doesn't mean that they're the person who's standing up for the right things. Sometimes it may be the person who's the loneliest who's actually the person on the right path. So I really, really took that example from Imam Hassan's life, and I understood that Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he went through so much, but he never conformed to peer pressure because he always knew that what Allah thought of him was more important than what the society thought of him. And obviously, as the Imam, he knew what was best for the community. Also, I'll give another example. A few sessions ago, we mentioned the story of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, how he actually, on the other hand, Imam Ali and the Imams before Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam used to dress, in very not worn out clothes, but their clothes weren't as, like hi-fi, because people of the time, that's just how they dressed. There was no issue with dressing, low profile. But Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam used to wear very, very nice clothes, high quality clothes, really good looking clothes. And remember that one farmer who was pretending to be a good Muslim asked Imam Jafar Sadiq, if you say that you're from the Ahlul Bayt, why are you so attached to the materialistic world? Why are you wearing such good clothes? And then Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, he revealed, he lifted up his his good clothes to show that the worn out clothes underneath, and he said, I never forgot where I came from, but just he was saying that the point of that story is that basically people of that time, of that society, they dressed well. And as society progressed, people started dressing better and better. So Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, obviously, if he was the only person wearing worn out clothes and everyone else was wearing fancy clothes, that would actually look bad on his part. So as long as there's nothing Islamically wrong, he actually wore good clothes because obviously he had to protect his honor, his dignity, his izzat, but he still never forgot where he came from. So as long as, so that's another good point I wanted to mention, where it's okay to obviously, do something that everyone else does, as long as you're not doing it out of pressure, and as long as it's not going against Islam. Because obviously Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam did not conform to peer pressure in any way. He didn't care what people thought, but just for his honor, his dignity, he just wore good clothes because just there was nothing wrong with that. There was nothing Islamically wrong with wearing good clothes, so that's just what he did because everyone around him did that. So those are two examples from the Imam's time. And I want to mention the stories of three prophets. The people of Prophet Lut, they were all destroyed. The people of Prophet Nuh, the whole world at that time was destroyed. And also the people of Prophet Musa, because Prophet Musa had to go back to Egypt, and then, they experienced those deadly plagues, and a lot of his people were destroyed. A lot of the Egyptians, where he used to grow up, that was his family. Egypt was his home. So it's really sad to see how, we have stories of so many other prophets, and it's so sad to see how their communities, their families, their whole lives, everything they built their lives upon just crumbles into ashes because the people of their time were wrong. The people of Prophet Lut, they were committing a grave sin, and the whole town was destroyed. So Prophet Lut, it teaches you that conforming to peer pressure at times could mean the worst of things, because their whole communities were destroyed, and these prophets had to really stay strong amidst all of that, really traumatizing experiences. So the lesson is, in history, we learned that to never conform to peer pressure, because we've learned time and time again that, people of the past have not been good role models and good examples. And if everyone in a society is doing something, that does not mean you should follow it, because usually it's the elite few who don't conform to peer pressure that end up being the ones who are saved from damnation. So those are some stories I would like to share with you. Any other thing you want to mention about that?
Not really. I just think that it's really important, especially the story about Imam Jafar alayhi salam, to realize the fine boundaries between, conforming to peer pressure and upholding your dignity. Because you know how you said earlier that a lot of elders these days, a lot of parents these days are often talking about what will people say, right? And they care so much about society. So it's high time that we, looked into ourselves and we realized, are we actually trying to prevent ourselves from doing certain actions and, doing certain practices, keeping up certain traditions because it's for our own dignity and honor, or are we just doing it because everyone around us is doing it,
Yeah, that's a really great point, Gazina, because we really have to understand that peer pressure affects everyone, and definitely with the imams' lives we see that upholding honor and dignity is very important. So like you said, there is a fine line between conforming to peer pressure and upholding your honor, because in Islam honor is so important. And I feel like with the way we dress, that's the most apparent thing people see about us, right? The first thing people see, their first impression is the way we dress, maybe even before they even talk to us, because that's just what they see. That's the first thing they see. So for girls especially, it's really hard, because I feel like for boys they don't have that many rules when it comes to hijab. But for girls it's really hard, because what our society's ideals of how a girl should dress is completely different than what Islam says, right? For boys it's okay, because in our society boys wear a pant and shirt, and Islamically boys can wear that as well. But unfortunately for women wear things that are you can in Islam you cannot wear those things whatsoever, and we're really told to uphold our reputation through wearing hijab, while in our society we're kind of taught that to uphold our honor and respect, we should be wearing things that other people approve of. We should be wearing things that make us look the best. We should be showing off what we have, and people put on a lot of makeup, too much perfume, too much makeup, they cake it on at young ages as well. And then it gets really hard, because the first thing about that is one, you're kind of really depending on what other people think of you, but second, you'll never be happy of how you look, because you'll become so so obsessed with how you look, with just your physical appearances, which is so hard to do, because society always comes up with better ways to do it. You see eyebrow trends or fashion trends that always are constantly changing. It's never the same thing. Every year, with fashion runways, we see all these new examples of what's in that year. And I feel if someone depends their lives, if someone depends their happiness on just fashion and how they look, then they'll never be happy, because it's constantly changing. They'll constantly struggle to conform to that. So it's really important to uphold your dignity and to wear proper hijab, especially if you're a girl. And always know that obviously culturally, when parents say, what will people think, it's fine to think that way, obviously, to uphold your honor and dignity, as long as you're not going against Islam, and as long as you're not causing trouble on anyone else, because sometimes we go out of our way and cause other people trouble just so that our honor and dignity is upheld. So as long as we stay within our lanes and we don't go against Islam, then obviously we can do what we want to uphold our honor, to uphold our dignity. But just remember where your priorities are, because your priority should always be to follow Allah, to follow the rules, and to really just celebrate individuality. So with that being said, we mentioned a lot of issues about peer pressure, a lot of what it is and why it happens, and why it's wrong. But we should talk about some solutions now, right? Because if we're talking so much about what's wrong with peer pressure, we should tell the audience what they can do to really mitigate the detrimental effects of falling victim to peer pressure. So Gazina, do you have any solutions to this issue?
Yeah, I think that of course they're not, if they were proven solutions, then it wouldn't really be a problem. But I do think that we really need to sort of get together with people who are educated in these areas. So for example, we have Maulanas, we have teachers, we have people who have went to Iran and went to these areas to study specifically in Islam, right? Because we need to realize, sure, you can go to your school counselor, you can go to teachers, but are they really able to understand how your religion and your culture and how you're raised come together? Because the counselors, the teachers, a lot of the kids these days go to public school, right? And the problem there is that your teachers, your role models, your counselors, these people that are there to help you with your problems, right? They don't understand where you're coming from. They don't understand your background or what your religion asks of you, right? So when you go up to them and you have problems with oh, I don't know how to balance my religion, and my parents are saying this, or you tell them any of your problems, they'll first of all form opinions about our religion and form opinions about us that aren't accurate because they don't have the proper background information to understand what you're trying to say, right? There's a lot of misconceptions there. And second of all, they'll probably misguide you, right? Because they're coming from the very society that, supports, it reinforces like the commodification of women, that, as you said, we're sort of encouraged to dress up, show what we have, and put loads of makeup on and wear revealing clothes because that shows our value as women, right? While on the other hand, Islam is like, no, you let your inner beauty shine through, right? Because when you do cover everything that our culture, our society asks of us, then people can really see you for who you are instead of just a product that's to be like sold or given attention to, right? So I think it's really important that you consult with there's the Molanas at our centers, there's these people who come to visit, and they're here for you, they're here for all of us, right? They're here to educate us, to have sessions with us, ask questions, ask them, how do you balance these things? And get opinions from different people, your parents, everyone that actually cares for you and understands where you're coming from, because when you do that, they can force you to bring attention to the fact that you are being influenced by your friends at school or the community around us. You are being influenced. It's not just you influencing the people around you.
Yeah, definitely, Gazina. And I feel like another reason, like another way we can really kind of mitigate these detrimental effects of peer pressure is to really focus on your strengths, focus on your good aspects. Because I feel like the underlying issue when it comes to peer pressure is that you, like, if you conform to peer pressure, you, for some reason, subconsciously believe that you're not good enough. And we're all, victims to that. We all have our insecurities. We all feel like we're not good in like certain ways. So peer pressure, conforming to that, is a way of us kind of becoming what we think is a better person. Like, oh, if I do this, if I follow this trend, if I do that, I'll be a better person, I'll be more liked, I'll feel better about myself, I'll feel some more fulfillment in my, existence and my identity. So really, if you find yourselves always, running to follow the latest trend or to, adopt the latest fashion trend or use the most, interesting new slangs that come up, which I don't even know what they are these days. Like my sister comes home and says things, I don't know what she's saying. But if you always find yourself like, struggling to run after the next new thing, then stop for a second and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Because if someone is truly, truly confident with themselves and really content with who they are, then they shouldn't really look towards other people for approval. They shouldn't look towards doing all these new things to feel better about themselves. So at the end of the day, one solution is to really stop and think about why you're falling victim to this peer pressure. And if you have some underlying issue, like some insecurity, something, work on that. So one great solution is to first focus on your strengths. Focus on what makes you a really good individual. Celebrate your individuality. Focus on your strengths, your talents, your hobbies, your interests, your good qualities, and work from there. So, this can help make a list. I know it sounds like super basic, but literally just if you make a list, you'll be surprised about how many things you like about yourself. And then you can kind of build on from there. For example, if you think that you're a very, very honest person, just make a pact to never lie ever, to kind of build on that. Or if you feel like you pray on Wazilat all the time, then try continue doing that for like a certain allotted time period. So try to make goals for yourself, and then make another list of all the qualities that you want to improve, because Islamically it's so important that we always improve ourselves. So make a list of all the qualities you like about yourself and build upon those, and then make a list of all the qualities that you think you might want to improve upon. And maybe you'll find in that list reasons why you think you're conforming to peer pressure. For example, if you feel like you don't have enough friends as other people, then you'll maybe notice a trend that you're always posting online of yourself with your friends, because you feel like that'll make up for how you feel about yourself inside. So maybe try to really find those hints and those patterns in your actions, and try to really develop that. And if you have any issues, any negative qualities, always make sure to fix those first, because it's really important to fix the underlying issue instead of focusing on these external factors. So that's one solution, to really focus on yourself, your good qualities, your bad qualities, work on that. Another is to understand the harm of peer pressure. And we mentioned this before, Gazina also mentioned this, peer pressure is so scary, because the younger you get, the more victim you are. The older you get, you can be as equally victim to it as whatever age you are. And the more you conform to the norm, the more you kind of become dependent on it. So you kind of slowly become desensitized to all the wrong things because you start to think that it's okay. You start to think that this is what I have to do in order to be accepted. So you have to understand the harm. This is like a psychological issue, and it happens in our subconscious. And it's really scary because when something happens in our subconscious, it's something that we're not really aware of, and we have to be very careful because we might realize it when it's too late. So we have to understand that if we conform to peer pressure, we go into this downward spiral of always doing so and always thinking that our happiness relies on how in we are with the times, and that's not always the case, in reality. And then lastly, one other solution to kind of breaking away from this domino effect of always conforming is to know the Islamic perspective. So Gazina mentioned have a good circle of friends. Islamically, who your social circle is so important, and like how we mentioned stories from the imams, from the prophets' lives, how we see history repeats itself. So the societies in the past where everyone conformed to one thing, they were all annihilated, they were all demolished. So at the end of times, we're living in terrible societies as well. So just understand the Islamic perspective that as long as you're confident with who you are, that's all that matters, and your confidence should come with how good or bad of a Muslim you are. So the better Muslim you are, the more confident you should be in yourself. As long as you're performing your Islamic obligations, as long as you know that Allah is happy with you, then you shouldn't really care about what other people think, because in history, there were so many people who were upset with the prophets and imams, but at the end of the day, those people perished, and the imams were the ones who, ruled supreme at the end of the day. So these are three really important things. So again, one is to make a list of your good and bad qualities. Two is to understand the issue and how dangerous peer pressure is. Once you understand that, you become aware. And lastly, it is to educate yourself on the Islamic perspective. So Gazina, do you want to give any example of your life, of how you kind of were a victim to peer pressure and how maybe you came out of it?
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's a little personal, but if it helps other people, that's really good. At first I grew up in a private Islamic school, right? And everyone around me was Muslim. They were the same culture. And so when I'd walk down the hallways, I felt like I was at home. It wasn't any different, right? But it was in 5th grade that I actually transferred to a public school for the first time. And that's when I actually realized how alienated I felt because of the hijab I wore and my skin color. And I know a lot of people, talk about how they're minorities and things, and I didn't realize how true it was until I walked into that school, because I was the only person who wore hijab there, right? And for me, it was really hard. I noticed it was really hard because I didn't have any other friends who were like me, right? If I just had one friend who was Muslim, who wore hijab, maybe I wouldn't have felt so alienated, right? And unfortunately, I couldn't do anything at that time. I had to go through the year, finish elementary school. And then when I went to middle school, I finally made friends who were like me. And that helped me so much, because when we were walking down the hallways or when we were in class, I didn't have to feel lonely anymore, right? Because people are making jokes and references to songs and, celebrities that I never heard of. I didn't look at because my parents didn't want me to watch those kinds of shows, right? And at first I felt mad and upset that, hey, why can't I watch what they're watching? Why can't I go out and have play dates with them, or hang out at their homes? Why can't I go to their homes, right? It seemed, or have sleepovers. It just seemed so different from what everyone around me was used to. But after that, I had to go through, of course, you listen to your parents. That's where it comes to your parents know what's better for you, right? At that point in time, sure, I know it sucks when you're sitting there and someone's like, you're too young, you don't understand the reality and the extent of what you're doing. So let the people who are older than you make those decisions for you. But it's so true, right? Because at that point you don't know. You're so likely to fall prey to peer pressure and make decisions that you probably shouldn't, right? So I listened to my parents. I do, what they told me. And then when I finally grew up a little bit, I realized that, hey, those friends that I had in elementary school or in middle school that I really wanted to go over to, their parents were doing stuff at night. They were going out places that my parents did not want me to see and didn't want me to be next to those kinds of people, because their culture and their environment is extremely different, right? So that's why it's really important to conform with what your parents say, and to make friends that are like you, first of all, with the same background or have the same sort of understanding, so that they don't force you to do things subconsciously that you probably shouldn't be doing. And then also I understand how we talked about earlier that, that we all try to seek approval from others, and you need to realize, what you're seeking approval from. But I understand it's natural for everyone to seek approval, which is why Imam Ali and all these people say, they warn you to, be careful about who you make friends with. Because if you make friends with people who are better than you, or who are ahead of you spiritually, religiously, in everything, when you try to seek their approval, you're only getting better, right? You're just moving ahead, you're progressing, which is something that Islam really encourages. Which is why it's okay to seek approval from people around you, but just make sure that the people you're seeking approval from are people that'll benefit you, not harm you.
That's a great example, Gazina, and I can actually, kind of relate to that, because I used to go to a private school for a very long time, and then suddenly for high school I was like thrown into a public school. It was my own decision. I wanted to go and kind of experience the world, and it was really hard for me because like the people, the way they dressed, the way they talked, just the things they did, completely different. It was like shocking for me, because I attended a private Islamic school for like my whole life, and then suddenly I was exposed to like the real world, as people would say, and I was not prepared. And sometimes obviously like I would like kind of like maybe do things that everyone else did just to make myself feel like less of an outsider. Because for the first time, people will start asking me about, why I dress that certain way, why can't you shake guys' hands, why don't you listen to music, because in American society, music is it's so accepted, it's like literally part of their everyday life, and people cannot imagine, life without it. So just to know someone who doesn't shake people's hands or doesn't listen to music, it was like a big deal, People didn't understand why I covered myself, they didn't understand why I had to pray 5 times a day, and it kind of really made me insecure, but then over time it strengthened me, because as people asked and as I educated them, I became more confident in my decisions, and I became more confident in my own actions. So, always be careful of the changes you go through, because some change is good, but some change kind of really challenges you and questions you and really tests you, and you have to really pull through and stay strong, regardless of what goes on. And I want to give some other examples, because I want to kind of explain why peer pressure is not always a bad thing, because I know we always talk about how like peer pressure is so terrible, and that's the kind of the vibe we've been giving out this whole session. But there are examples where peer pressure can actually be a good thing in a way, or maybe at least if they can help nudge you to the right direction. So 2 examples from my own life. One is there was this one book series that everyone at the time was reading, and I don't have to mention the name because there's just so many examples of famous book series that everyone starts to read. And because of that, I said, okay, you know what, everyone's talking about this book, it might be really great. So I went to go to the library, check it out, and read it. And after I read it, I fell in love with books, I fell in love with reading, and now I read everything. I read like magazines, I read articles, I read journal entries, I read even the news. I read other books as well. Like, I fell in love with reading because of that one thing. Even though it started off as something that was peer pressure, it kind of really made me find my love for reading. So that's one example that I really liked, that really helped me in the long run. And the second example is one, I think we've all been hearing something about like not using plastic because it kills the turtles. So I didn't know that plastic was such a big issue, but literally like several people told me whenever I was using plastic straws, they were like, Azra, that's gonna kill the turtles. And I was so confused. I had no idea what that meant. But basically what they're saying is basically the more plastic you use, even if you dispose of it properly, it's still eventually, a lot of it ends up in the oceans, and it ends up killing a lot of animals, like like the fish, the birds, the turtles, all these creatures that live in the ocean, they die because of the plastic pollution. So I didn't know that, but because everyone said that, I became educated about an issue that I didn't know existed, and now I actually don't use plastic straws. So peer pressure, although it started as something called peer pressure, it kind of spiraled into something that was positive. So remember how we mentioned, as long as peer pressure is not something that goes against Islam, it maybe kind of might be good for you. Gazina, any other example of how peer pressure was like?
Well, I actually wanted to quickly mention, I just heard you talk about the shaking hands thing, and I find this kind of funny now, but when I actually joined debate, because my friend was doing it, and I didn't want to be left behind, right? So I decided to join debate, and when I'd go to tournaments, after every single round, you have to like shake hands with the judge and your opponents. And at first, I was like, wait, if I don't shake hands with, well, not with the judge, but if I don't shake hands with them, I might lose, right? And I didn't realize that, like, the decision's made, no one's gonna judge me because I didn't shake hands, since it's not religiously allowed. But to me, I just didn't want to stand out, right? But now, like looking back at it, I don't think not shaking hands with someone's going to change that I'm standing out, right? I wear a headscarf, I walk around. No matter what we do, we always stand out, right? People are watching you, what you're doing, they're judging, right? Because they're forming an impression of all of us based off what your actions are, right? And it's sort of daunting at first, but it also sort of gives you an advantage if you look at it in the positive light, right? Because when you walk in for that job interview or you walk in anywhere and you have opinions and you're speaking, right? People will remember you, right? Because you're different from everyone else that walked in. Or if you say, hey, I can't shake hands because it's not religiously allowed, it means that you're that one person out of everyone in that place or around you that actually sticks to their religion and abides by what they're saying because they firmly believe in it, right? My parents aren't there to watch me when I walk in for an interview or when I'm there shaking hands with my opponents. They're not there to watch me. They're not there to enforce, hey, don't do that. Or no one's there to judge me, right? Except for God and those people in that room. But I still choose not to because it's my religion and it's my beliefs. And that really sets me apart, or sets you apart, or whoever decides to do it, because you're choosing to actually, act based off what your religion tells you and what your beliefs tell you. So that means that you're different from everyone.
Yeah, that's a great example. Like shaking hands is something that's always been an issue because we are so scared about that. But I heard this once in a speech and it really stood out to me. One Maulana said that, do you think when you walk into that room for the interview, do you not think that Allah already decided your outcome for you? So do you really think you shaking that person's hand is gonna, change the outcome whether you or not you get the job? So always know that at the end of the day, Allah decides your future. So never think that your future or the decisions of your life are in someone else's hands.
Exactly.
Because if you stay true to your religion and if you only care about what Allah thinks, then He will do wonders for your life. So always remember that. And that's one closing thought that I want to really part with, that at the end of the day, if your intentions are just for Allah, He's going to move mountains just to make your life something that you would love. So always remember, never rely on other people for your happiness or for your approval, because at the end of the day, them liking you is not going to do anything for you. Whether people like you or hate you, that's not going to do anything for you. But if Allah loves you, if Allah cares about you, then He can change your whole entire life. So that's one closing thought. Gazina, do you have any other parting thoughts on the matter?
I just think it's really important not to let all these rulings or what you should be doing to deter you from what you want to do, because there's always a way, right? For me, people would be like, don't go, why are you interested in law? Why do you want to be an attorney? You're gonna have to shake hands with everyone all the time. You're gonna have to do things that you shouldn't do. But you can always look at it from the positive light, right? I don't have to shake hands with anyone. I don't have to support injustice. I can work for a human rights organization. I can go ahead and protect the people that I care about, my community, right? Because we always need people to go out and sort of be good at what they're doing, right? So I just want to say that whatever it is for you, for me maybe it's law, for her it's maybe whatever she's interested in, but for you, whatever it is you want to do, or your ambitions, what you're interested in, you can always find a way to balance your religion with what you want, as long as it's okay in Islam, as long as it's allowed, and you can help the people around you doing what you do. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And always remember, just because everyone does it, it does not mean it's okay. So at the end of the day, always care about what Allah thinks, because He is the one and only one who has complete control over your life. So with that being said, we would like to conclude today's program. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time, inshallah, on Youth Perspectives.